All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, and see what misadventures we have ahead of us tonight. Welcome back. This is our fourth night of reading from Cervantes' Don Quixote. I do need to update our drink here because I am not feeling stupendous today. So we're switching it up to a little bit of something softer. Well, coffee's already soft. Yeah, we're a little rough tonight. So I'm not sure if we're gonna make it the full time, but we're gonna see what we can get done. I assure you, it sounds worse than it is, but I'm still kind of rough around the edges tonight. But tea and Ricola will carry us through. Alright, so, last time we saw some of the further adventures, wherein once more our plucky protagonist mistook an inn for a castle, conveniently. And then, also conveniently, when he realized that it was a castle, he remembered that knights don't pay for lodgings. Yeah, it's been a rough week. It started hitting me on, I'd say, Wednesday, and I wasn't quite... It didn't hit me as hard. I think it was more of a sinus thing on Friday, but it has since migrated south, and has settled firmly in my chest. So... we'll see if a day of rest tomorrow will help us out. So, we've got some reading to do tonight. We'll see how long we can make it. But we've seen some further misadventures from Don Quixote. He was freed from the prison of his own making as he was battered and bruised. And we'll see this time around whether Sancho will sort of talk him into doing something sensible, or if he will continue along his merry way. I'm rather hoping and expecting the latter, but we'll see. We'll see. So, let's go ahead and shift over to our reading screen and see where the night will take us. So, we resume now with Chapter 18 of Don Quixote, in which is related the discourse Sancho Panza held with his master Don Quixote, and other adventures worth relating. Sancho reached his master so limp and faint that he could not urge on his beast. When Don Quixote saw the state he was in, he said, "I have now come to the conclusion, good Sancho, that this castle, or inn, is beyond a doubt enchanted, because those who have so atrociously diverted themselves with thee, what can they be but phantoms, or beings of another world? And I hold this confirmed by having noticed that when I was by the wall of the yard witnessing the acts of thy sad tragedy, it was out of my power to mount upon it, nor could I even dismount for Rocinante, because they no doubt had me enchanted. For I swear to thee by the faith of what I am, that if I had been able to climb up or dismount, I would have avenged thee in such a way that those braggart thieves would have remembered their freak forever, even though in doing so I knew that I contravened the laws of chivalry, which, as I have often told thee, do not permit a knight to lay hands on him who is not one, save in case of urgent and great necessity, in defense of his own life and person." "I would have avenged myself too, if I could," said Sancho, "whether I had been dubbed knight or not. But I could not, though for my part I am persuaded those who amused themselves with me were not phantoms or enchanted men, as your worship says, but men of flesh and bone like ourselves. And they all had their names, for I heard them name them when they were tossing me. And one was called Pedro Martinez, and another Tenorio Hernandez, and the innkeeper I heard was called Juan Palomeque, the left-handed. So that, Signor, your not being able to leap over the wall of the yard or dismount from your horse came of something else besides enchantments. And that I make out clearly from all this is that these adventures we go seeking will in the end lead us into such misadventures that we shall not know which is our right foot, and that the best and wisest thing, according to my small wits, would be for us to return home, now that it is harvest time, and attend to our business, and give over wandering from Zecca to Mecca, and from pail to bucket, as the saying is. How little thou knowest about chivalry, Sancho, replied Don Quixote. Hold thy peace, and have patience. The day will come when thou shalt see, with thine own eyes, what an honourable thing it is to wander in the pursuit of this calling. Nay, tell me, what greater pleasure can there be in the world, or what delight can equal that of winning a battle, and triumphing over one's enemy? None, beyond all doubt. Very likely, answered Sancho, though I do not know it. All I know is that since we have been knights-errant, or since your worship has been one, for I have no right to rank myself one so honourable a number, we have never won any battle, except the one with the Biscayan, and even out of that your worship came with half an ear and half a helmet, no less. And from that till now, I have been cuddling, and it has all been cuddling and more cuddlings, cuffs and more cuffs. I getting the blanketing over and above, and falling in with enchanted persons on whom I cannot avenge myself, so as to know what the delight, as your worship calls it, of conquering an enemy is like. That is what vexes me, and what ought to vex thee, Sancho, replied Don Quixote. But henceforward I will endeavour to have at hand some sword made by craft, that no kind of enchantments can take effect upon him who carries it. And it is even possible that fortune may procure for me that which belonged to Amadis when he was called the Knight of the Burning Sword, which was one of the best swords that ever knight in the world possessed, for besides having the said virtue, it cut like a razor, and there was no armour, however strong and enchanted it might be, that could resist it. Such is my luck, said Sancho, that even if that happened, and your worship found some such sword, it would, like the balsam, turn out serviceable and good for dubbed knight only. And as for the squires, they might sup sorrow. Fear not that, Sancho, said Don Quixote. Heaven will deal better by thee. Thus talking, Don Quixote and his squire were going along, when, on the road they were following, Don Quixote perceived approaching them a large and thick cloud of dust, on seeing which he turned to Sancho and said, This is the day, Sancho, on which we will be seen the boon my fortune is reserving for me. This, I say, is the day on which as much as on any other shall be displayed the might of my arm, and on which I shall do deeds that shall remain written in the book of fame for all ages to come. Seest thou that cloud of dust which rises yonder? Well then, all that is churned up by a vast army composed of various and countless nations that comes marching there. According to that, there must be two, said Sancho, for on this opposite side also there rises just such another cloud of dust. Don Quixote turned to look, and found that it was true, and rejoicing exceedingly, he concluded that there were two armies about to engage and encounter in the midst of that broad plain, for at all times and seasons his fancy was full of the battles, enchantments, adventures, crazy feats, loves, and defiances that are recorded in the books of chivalry, and everything he said, thought, or did had reference to such things. Now, the cloud of dust he had seen was raised by two great droves of sheep coming along the same road in opposite directions, which, because of the dust, did not become visible until they drew near. but Don Quixote asserted so positively that they were armies that Sancho was led to believe it, and said, "Well, what are we to do, Senor?" "What?" said Don Quixote. "Give aid and assistance to the weak, and those who need it. And thou must know, Sancho, that this which comes opposite to us is conducted and led by the mighty Emperor Alefanfaron, lord of the great isle of Trapobana. This other that marches behind me is that of his enemy, the king of the Garamantas, Pentapolin, of the bare arm, for he always goes into battle with his right arm bare." "But why are these two lords such enemies?" "They are at enmity," replied Don Quixote, "because this Alefanfaron is a furious pagan, and is in love with the daughter of Pentapolin, who is a very beautiful and, moreover, gracious lady, and a Christian. And her father is unwilling to bestow her upon the pagan king, unless he first abandons the religion of his false prophet Mahomet, and adopts his own." "By my beard," said Sancho, "but Pentapolin does quite right, and I will help him as much as I can." "In that thou wilt do what is thy duty, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for to engage in battles of this sort, it is not requisite to be a dubbed knight." "That I can well understand," answered Sancho, "but where shall we put this ass, where we may be sure to find him after the fray is over? For I believe it has not been the custom so far to go into battle on a beast of this kind." "That is true," said Don Quixote, "and what you had best do with him is to leave him to take his chance whether he be lost or not. For the horses we shall have when we come out victorious will be so many that even Rocinante will run a risk of being changed for another. But attend to me, and observe, for I wish to give thee some account of the chief knights who accompany these two armies, and that thou mayest the better see and mark, let us withdraw to that hillock which rises yonder, whence both armies may be seen." They did so, and placed themselves on a rising ground from which the two droves that Don Quixote made armies of might have been plainly seen if the clouds of dust they raised had not obscured them and blinded the sight. Nevertheless, seeing in his imagination what he did not see and what did not exist, he began thus in a loud voice: "That knight whom thou seest yonder in yellow armor, who bears upon his shield a lion crowned crouching at the feet of a damsel, is the valiant Lorcalco, lord of the Silver Bridge. That one in armor with flowers of gold, who bears on his shield 3 crowns argent on an azure field, is the dreaded Micocolembo, Grand Duke of Quixote. That other, of gigantic frame on his right hand, is the ever dauntless Brandabarbaran de Bolice, lord of the 3 Arabias, who for armor wears that serpent skin, and has for shield a gate, which, according to tradition, is one of those of the temple that Samson brought to the ground, when, by his death, he revenged himself upon his enemies. But turn thine eyes to the other side, and thou shalt see in front and in the van of this other army the ever victorious and never vanquished Timidel of Carcellona, Prince of New Biscay, who comes in armor with arms quartered azure, vert, white, and yellow, and bears on his shield a cat, or a field tawny, with a motto which says meow, which is the beginning of the name of his lady, who, according to report, is the fearless Meowlina, daughter of the Duke Alfeniquin of the Algarve. The other, who burdens and presses the loins of that powerful charger, and bears arms white as snow, and a shield blank and without any device, is a novice knight, a Frenchman by birth, Pierre Papin by name, lord of the baronies of Urtique. That other, who with iron-shod heels strikes the flanks of that nimble party-coloured zebra, and for arms bears azure vert, is the mighty Duke of Nerbia, Espartafilardo del Bosque, who bears for device on his shield an asparagus plant with a motto in Castilian that says Rostrea Misrete. And so he went on naming a number of knights of one squadron or the other out of his imagination, and to all he assigned offhand their arms, colors, devices, and mottos, carried away by the illusions of his unheard-of praise. And without a pause, he continued, "People of diverse nations compose this squadron in front. Here are those that drink of the sweet waters of the famous Xanthus, those that scour the woody Massilian plains, those that sift the pure, fine gold of Arabia Felix, those that enjoy the famed, cool banks of the crystal Thermodon, those that, in many and various ways, divert the streams of the golden Pactolus, the Numidians, faithless in their promises, and the Persians, renowned in archery, the Parthians, and the Medes, that fight as they fly, the Arabs, that ever shift their dwellings, the Scythians, as cruel as they are fair, the Ethiopians, with pierced lips, and an infinity of other nations, whose features I recognize and descry, though I cannot recall their names. In this other squadron, there come those that drink of the crystal streams of the olive-bearing Betis, those that make smooth their countenances with the water of the ever-rich and golden Tagus, those that rejoice in the fertilizing flow of the divine Genil, those that roam the Tartesian plains abounding in pasture, those that take their pleasure in the Elysian meadows of Jerez, the rich Manchegans, crowned with ruddy ears of corn, the wearers of iron, old relics of the Gothic race, those that bathe in the Piserga, renowned for its gentle current, those that feed their herds among the spreading pastures of the winding Guadiana, famed for its hidden course, those that tremble with the cold of the pine-clad Pyrenees, or the dazzling snows of the lofty Apennine. In a word, as many as all Europe includes and contains." All right, calm down. Calm down, Don. Please. Please. I am rather certain that probably at least half of those places don't exist. And the other half plucked from whatever page of an atlas Cervantes was looking at as he was writing the book. It really is. It just keeps going on and on and on. And the names and the creativity just roll out. All right. Good God, what a number of countries and nations he named, giving to each its proper attributes with marvelous readiness, brimful and saturated with what he had read in his lying books. Sancho Panza hung upon his words without speaking, and from time to time turned to try if he could see the knights and giants his master was describing, and as he could not make out one of them, he said to him, "Signor, devil take it if there's a sign of any man you talk of, knight or giant, in the whole thing. Maybe it's all an enchantment, like the phantoms last night." "How canst thou say that?" answered Don Quixote. "Dost thou not hear the neighing of the steeds, the braying of the trumpets, the roll of the drums?" "I hear nothing but the great bleating of ewes and sheep," said Sancho, which was true, for by this time the two flocks had come close. "The fear thou art in, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "prevents thee from seeing or hearing correctly. For one of the effects of fear is to derange the senses, and to make things appear differently from what they are. If thou art in such fear, withdraw to one side and leave me to myself, for alone I suffice to bring victory to that side to which I shall give my aid." And so saying, he gave Rocinante the spur, and, putting the lance in rest, shot down the slope like a thunderbolt. Sancho shouted after him, crying, "Come back, Signor Don Quixote! I vow to God they are sheep and ewes you are charging. Come back! Unlucky the father that begot me! What madness is this? Look, there is no giant, nor knight, nor cats, nor arms, nor shields quartered or whole, nor vair, azure, or bedevil. What are you about? Sinner that I am before God!" But not for all these entreaties did Don Quixote turn back. On the contrary, he went on shouting out, "Ho, knights, ye who follow and fight under the banners of the valiant Emperor Pentapolin of the Bare Arm, follow me all! Ye shall see how easily I shall give him his revenge over his enemy, Aliphanfaron of the Trapobana." So saying, he dashed into the midst of the squadron of ewes, and began spearing them with as much spirit and intrepidity as if he were transfixing mortal enemies in earnest. The shepherds and drovers accompanying the flock shouted to him to desist. Seeing it was no use, they ungirt their slings and began to salute his ears with stones as big as one's fist. Don Quixote gave no heed to the stones, but, letting drive right and left, kept saying, "Where art thou, proud Alphaphron? Come before me. I am a single knight who would fain prove thy prowess hand to hand, and make thee yield thy life a penalty for the wrong thou dost to the valiant Pentapolin Garamanta." Here came a sugar plum from the brook that struck him on the side and buried a couple of ribs in his body. Feeling himself so smitten, he imagined himself slain or badly wounded for certain, and, recollecting his liquor, he drew out his flask, and, putting it to his mouth, began to pour the contents into his stomach. But ere he had succeeded in swallowing what seemed to him enough, there came another almond, which struck him on the hand, and on the flask so fairly that it smashed it to pieces, knocking 3 or 4 teeth and grinders out of his mouth in its course, and sorely crushing 2 fingers of his hand. Such was the force of the first blow, and of the second, that the poor knight, in spite of himself, came down backwards off his horse. The shepherds came up, and felt sure they had killed him. So, in all haste, they collected their flock together, took up the dead beasts, of which there were now more than 7, and made off, without waiting to ascertain anything further. All this time, Sancho stood on the hill, watching the crazy feats his master was performing, and tearing his beard and cursing the hour and the occasion when fortune had made him acquainted with him. Seeing him then brought to the ground, and that the shepherds had taken themselves off, he ran to him, and found him in a very bad case, though not unconscious, and said he, "Did I not tell you to come back, Señor Don Quixote, and that what you were going to attack were not armies but droves of sheep?" "That's how the thief of a sage, my enemy, can alter and falsify things," answered Don Quixote. "Thou must know, Sancho, that it is a very easy matter for those of his sort to make us believe what they choose, and this malignant being who persecutes me, envious of the glory he knew I was to win in this battle, has turned the squadrons of the enemy into droves of sheep. At any rate, do this much, I beg of thee, Sancho, to undeceive thyself, and see that what I say is true. Mount thy ass, and follow them quietly, and thou shalt see that when they have gone some little distance from this, they will return to their original shape, and ceasing to be sheep, become men in all respects as I described them to thee at first. But go not just yet, for I want thy help and assistance. Come hither, and see how many of my teeth and grinders are missing, for I feel as if there was not one left in my mouth." Sancho came so close that he almost put his eyes into his mouth. Now, just at that moment, the balsam had acted on the stomach of Don Quixote, so, at the very instant when Sancho came to examine his mouth, he discharged all its contents, with more force than a musket, and full into the beard of the compassionate squire. Oh, Sancho! "Holy Mary!" cried Sancho. "What is this that has happened to me? Clearly, the sinner is mortally wounded, as he vomits blood from the mouth." But, considering the matter a little more closely, he perceived by the color, taste, and smell that it was not blood, but the balsam from the flask, which he had seen him drink, and he has taken with such a loathing that his stomach turned, and he vomited up his inside over his very master, and both were left in a precious state. Sancho ran to his ass to get something wherewith to clean himself, and relieve his master out of his alforjas. but not finding them, he well nigh took leave of his senses, and cursed himself anew. But in his heart he resolved to quit his master and return home, even though he forfeited the wages of his service and all hopes of the promised island. See, I feel bad for Sancho getting vomited on. I don't feel the same for Don Quixote. Yes, he's not quite all right, but come on. Don Quixote now rose, and, putting his left hand to his mouth to keep his teeth from falling out altogether, with the other he laid hold of the bridle of Rocinante, who had never stirred from his master's side, so loyal and well-behaved was he, and betook himself to where the squire stood leaning over his ass with his hand to his cheek, like one in deep dejection. Seeing him in this mood, looking so sad, Don Quixote said to him, "Bear in mind, Sancho, that one man is no more than another, unless he does more than another. All these tempests that fall upon us are signs that fair weather is coming shortly, and that things will go well for us. For it is impossible for good or evil to last forever, and hence it follows that the evil having lasted long, the good must now be nigh at hand. So thou must not distress thyself at the misfortunes which happened to me, since thou hast no share in them." "How have I not?" replied Sancho. "Was he whom they blanketed yesterday perchance any other than my father's son? And the alforjas that are missing today, with all my treasures, did they belong to any other but myself?" "What? Are the alforjas missing, Sancho?" said Don Quixote. "Yes, they are missing," answered Sancho. "In that case, we have nothing to eat today," replied Don Quixote. "It would be so," answered Sancho, "if there were none of the herbs your worship says you know in these meadows, those with which knights errant as unlucky as your worship are wont to supply such like shortcomings." "For all that," answered Don Quixote, "I would rather have just now a quarter of bread, or a loaf and a couple of pilchards' heads, than all the herbs described by Dioscorides, even with Dr. Laguna's notes. Nevertheless, Sancho the Good, mount thy beast, and come along with me, for God, who provides for all things, will not fail us, more especially when we are so active in his service as we are, since he fails not the midges of the air, nor the grubs of the earth, nor the tadpoles of the water, and is so merciful that he maketh his sun to rise on the good and on the evil, and sendeth rain on the unjust and on the just." "Your worship would make a better preacher than a knight-errant," said Sancho. "Knight-errants knew, and ought to know everything, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for they were knights-errant in former times as well, qualified to deliver a sermon or discourse in the middle of an encampment, as if they had graduated in the University of Paris, whereby we may see that the lance has never blunted the pen, nor the pen the lance." "Well, be it as your worship says," replied Sancho. "Let us be off now and find some place of shelter for the night, and God grant it may be somewhere where there are no blankets, nor blanketeers, nor phantoms, nor enchanted moors, for if there are, may the devil take the whole concern." "Ask that of God, my son," said Don Quixote, "and do thou lead on where thou wilt, for this time I leave our lodging to thy choice. But reach me here thy hand, and feel with thy finger, and find out how many of my teeth and grinders are missing from this right side of the upper jaw, for it is there I feel the pain." Sancho put in his fingers, and feeling about, asked him, "How many grinders used your worship have on this side?" "4," replied Don Quixote, "besides the back tooth, all whole and quite sound." "Mind what you are saying, signor." "I say 4, if not 5, answered Don Quixote, "for never in my life I had tooth or grinder drawn, nor has any fallen out or been destroyed by any decay or rheum." "Well then," said Sancho, "in this lower side, your worship has no more than 2 grinders and a half, and in the upper, neither a half nor any at all, for it is all smooth as the palm of my hand."
"Luckless that I am,"
said Don Quixote, hearing the sad news his squire gave him.
"I had rather they despoiled me of an arm, so it were not the sword arm. For I tell thee, Sancho, a mouth without teeth is like a mill without a millstone, and a tooth is much more to be prized than a diamond. But we, who profess the austere order of chivalry, are liable to all this. Mount, friend, and lead the way, and I will follow thee at whatever pace thou wilt."
Sancho did as he bade him, and proceeded in the direction in which he thought he might find refuge, without quitting the high road, which was there very much frequented. As they went along, then, at a slow pace, for the pain in Don Quixote's jaws kept him uneasy and ill-disposed for speed, Sancho thought it well to amuse and divert him by talk of some kind, and among the things he said to him was that which will be told in the following chapter. The ever bruised and beaten Don Quixote and faithful Sancho. That's some rather rough dentistry going on for poor Don Quixote there. Blues. Basically, all of the molars on the right side is. That's a rough day. That's a rough day. But we won't say he brought it on himself, because the man's a little around the bend. But maybe he should listen to Sancho. Just saying. Just saying. Alright, so continuing on, we've got chapter 19 of the shrewd discourse which Sancho held with his master, and of the adventure that befell him with a dead body, together with other notable occurrences.
"It seems to me, Signor, that all these mishaps that have befallen us of late have been, without any doubt, a punishment for the offence committed by your worship against the order of chivalry in not giving the oath you made not to eat bread off a tablecloth, or embrace the queen, and all the rest of it that your worship swore to observe until you had taken that helmet of Malandrinos, or whatever the Moor is called. For I do not very well remember."
"Thou art very right, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "but to tell the truth, it had escaped my memory. And likewise thou mayest rely upon it that the affair of the blanket happened to thee because of thy fault in not reminding me of it in time. But I will make amends, for there are ways of compounding for everything in the order of chivalry."
"Why, have I taken an oath of some sort, then?"
said Sancho. "It makes no matter that thou hast not taken an oath," said Don Quixote. "Suffice it that I see thou art not quite clear of complicity. And whether or no, it will not be ill done to provide ourselves with a remedy."
"In that case," said Sancho, "mind that your worship does not forget this, as you did the oath. Perhaps the phantoms may take it into their heads to amuse themselves once more with me, or even with your worship, if they see you so obstinate."
While engaged in this and other talk, night overtook them on the road before they had reached or discovered any place of shelter. And what made it still worse was that they were dying of hunger. For with the loss of the alforjas, they had lost their entire larder and commissariat, and to complete the misfortune, they met with an adventure which, without any invention, had really the appearance of one. It so happened that the night closed in somewhat darkly, but for all that they pushed on, Sancho feeling sure that as the road was the king's highway, they might reasonably expect to find some inn within a league or two. Going along, then, in this way, the night dark, the squire hungry, the master sharp set, they saw coming towards them, on the road they were traveling, a great number of lights, which looked exactly like stars in motion. Sancho was taken aback at the sight of them, nor did Don Quixote altogether relish them. The one pulled up his ass by the halter, the other his hack by the bridle, and they stood still, watching anxiously to see what all this would turn out to be. and found that the lights were approaching them. And the nearer they came, the greater they seemed. At which spectacle Sancho began to shake like a man dosed with mercury, and Don Quixote's hair stood on end. He, however, plucking up his spirit a little, said,
"This, no doubt, Sancho, will be a most mighty and perilous adventure, in which it will be needful for me to put forth all my valor and resolution."
Unlucky me, answered Sancho. If this adventure happens to be one of phantoms, as I am beginning to think it is, where shall I find the ribs to bear it?
"Be they phantoms ever so much," said Don Quixote, "I will not permit them to touch a thread of thy garments. For if they played tricks with thee the time before, it was because I was unable to leap the walls of the yard. But now we are on a wide plain, where I shall be able to wield my sword as I please."
And if they enchant and cripple you, as they did the last time, said Sancho, what difference will it make being in the open plain or not?
"For all that," replied Don Quixote, "I entreat thee, Sancho, to keep a good heart, for experience will tell thee what mine is."
I will, please God,
answered Sancho, and the two, retiring to one side of the road, set themselves to observe closely what all these moving lights might be. And very soon afterwards they made out some 20 encamisados, all on horseback, with lighted torches in their hands, the awe-inspiring aspect of whom completely extinguished the courage of Sancho, who began to chatter with his teeth like one in the cold fit of an ague. And his heart sank and his teeth chattered still the more when they perceived distinctly that behind them there came a litter covered over with black, and followed by 6 more mounted figures in mourning down to the very feet of their mules. And as the encamisados came along, they muttered to themselves in a low, plaintive tone. This strange spectacle, at such an hour, and in such a solitary place, was quite enough to strike terror into Sancho's heart, and even into his master's, and, save in Don Quixote's case, did so, for all Sancho's resolution had now broken down. It was just the opposite with his master, whose imagination immediately conjured up all this to him vividly, as one of the adventures in his books. He took it into his head that the litter was a bier on which was borne some sorely wounded or slain knight, to avenge whom was a task reserved for him alone, and without any further reasoning he laid his lance in rest, fixed himself firmly in his saddle, and with gallant spirit and bearing took up his position in the middle of the road, where the encamisados must of necessity pass. And as soon as he saw them near at hand, he raised his voice and said, "Halt, knights, or whosoever ye may be, and render me account of who ye are, whence ye came, where ye go, what it is ye carry upon that bier, for, to judge by appearances, either ye have done something wrong, or some wrong has been done to you. And it is fitting and necessary that I should know, either that I may chastise you for the evil ye have done, or else that I may avenge you for the injury that has been inflicted upon you."
We are in haste, answered one of the encamisados, and the inn is far off, and we cannot stop to render you such an account as you demand. And spurring his mule, he moved on. Don Quixote was mightily provoked by this answer, and seizing the mule by the bridle, he said,
"Halt, and be more mannerly, and render an account of what I have asked of you, else take my defiance to combat, all of you."
The mule was shy, and was so frightened at her bridle being seized that, rearing up, she flung her rider to the ground over her haunches. An attendant who was on foot, seeing the encamisado fall, began to abuse Don Quixote, who, now moved to anger, without any more ado, laying his lance in rest, charged one of the men in mourning and brought him badly wounded to the ground. And, as he wheeled round upon the others, the agility with which he attacked and routed them was a sight to see. for it seemed just as if wings had that instant grown upon Rocinante, so lightly and proudly did he bear himself. The encamisados were all timid folk and unarmed, so they speedily made their escape from the fray, and set off at a run across the plain with their lighted torches, looking exactly like maskers running on some gala or festival night. The mourners, too, enveloped and swathed in their skirts and gowns, were unable to bestir themselves, and so, with entire safety to himself, Don Quixote belabored them all, and drove them off against their will, for they all thought it was no man but a devil from hell come to carry away the dead body they had in the litter. Sancho beheld all this in astonishment at the intrepidity of his lord, and said to himself,
Clearly, this master of mine is as bold and valiant as he says he is.
A burning torch lay on the ground near the first man, whom the mule had thrown, by the light of which Don Quixote perceived him, and coming up to him, he presented the point of the lance to his face, calling on him to yield himself prisoner, or else he would kill him. To which the prostrate man replied, I am prisoner enough as it is. I cannot stir, for one of my legs is broken. I entreat you, if you be a Christian gentleman, not to kill me, which will be committing a grave sacrilege, for I am a licentiate, and I hold first orders. Then what the devil brought you here, being a churchman? Said Don Quixote. What, signor? Said the other. My bad luck. Then still worse awaits you, said Don Quixote, if you do not satisfy me as to all I asked you at first. You shall soon be satisfied, said the licentiate. You must know, then, that though just now I said I was a licentiate, I am only a bachelor, and my name is Alonso Lopez. I am a native of Alcobendas. I come from the city of Baeza, with 11 others, priests, the same who fled with the torches, and we are going to the city of Segovia, accompanying a dead body, which is in that litter, and is that of a gentleman who died in Baeza, where he was interred. And now, as I said, we are taking his bones to their burial place, which is in Segovia, where he was born. And who killed him? Asked Don Quixote. God, by means of a malignant fever that took him, answered the bachelor. In that case, said Don Quixote, the Lord has relieved me of the task of avenging his death, had any other slain him, but he who slew him, having slain him, there is nothing for it but to be silent, and shrug one's shoulders. I should do the same were he to slay myself. And I would have your reverence now that I am a knight of La Mancha, Don Quixote by name, and it is my business and calling to roam the world righting wrongs and redressing injuries. I do not know how that about righting wrongs can be, said the bachelor, for from straight you have made me crooked, leaving me with a broken leg that will never see itself straight again all the days of its life. And the injury you have redressed in my case has been to leave me injured in such a way that I shall remain injured forever. And the height of misadventure it was to fall in with you, who go in search of adventures. Things do not all happen in the same way, answered Don Quixote. It all came, Sir Bachelor Alonso Lopez, of your going, as you did by night, dressed in those surplices, which with lighted torches, praying, covered with mourning, so that naturally you looked like something evil and of the other world. And so I could not avoid doing my duty in attacking you. And I should have attacked you even had I known positively that you were the very devils of hell, for such I certainly believed and took you to be. As my fate is so willed it, said the bachelor, I entreat you, Sir Knight-errant, whose errand has been such an evil one for me, to help me to get from under this mule that holds one of my legs caught between the stirrup and the saddle. I would have talked on till tomorrow, said Don Quixote. How long were you going to wait before telling me of your distress? He at once called to Sancho, who, however, had no mind to come, as he was just then engaged in unloading a sumpter mule, well laden with provender, which these worthy gentlemen had brought with them. Sancho made a bag of his coat, and was getting together as much as he could, and as the bag would hold. He loaded his beast, and then hastened to obey his master's call, and helped him to remove the bachelor from under the mule. Then, putting him on her back, he gave him the torch, and Don Quixote bade him follow the track of his companions, and beg pardon of them on his part for the wrong which he could not help doing them. And said Sancho,
If by chance these gentlemen should want to know who was the hero that served them, your worship may tell them that he is the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha, otherwise called the Knight of the Rueful Countenance.
Good name. Good name. I dig it. Well done, Sancho. The bachelor then took his departure. I forgot to mention that before he did so, he said to Don Quixote, "Remember that you stand excommunicated, having laid violent hands on a holy thing. Juxta, illud, sicis, sedente diablo." Oh my. "I do not understand that Latin," answered Don Quixote, "but I know well I did not lay hands, only this pike. Besides, I did not think I was committing an assault upon priests or things of the church, which, like a Catholic and faithful Christian as I am, I respect and revere, but upon phantoms and spectres of the other world. But even so, I remember how it fared with Cid Ruy-Diaz when he broke the chair of the ambassador of that king before his holiness the Pope, who excommunicated him for the same. And yet the good Roderick of Vivar bore himself that day like a very noble and valiant knight." On hearing this, the bachelor took his departure, as has been said, without making any reply. And Don Quixote asked Sancho what had induced him to call him the Knight of the Rueful Countenance, more than at any other time.
I will tell you, answered Sancho. It was because I have been looking at you for some time by the light of the torch held by that unfortunate, and verily, your worship has got, of late, the most ill-favoured countenance I ever saw. It must be either owing to the fatigue of this combat, or else to the want of teeth and grinders.
"It is not that," replied Don Quixote, "but because the sage whose duty it will be to write the history of my achievements must have thought it proper that I should take some distinctive name, as all knights of yore did. One being he of the burning sword, another he of the unicorn, this one he of the damsels, that he of the phoenix, another the knight of the griffin, and another he of the death. And by these names and designations they were known all the world round. And so I say that the sage aforesaid must have put it into your mouth, and mind just now to call me the Knight of the Rueful Countenance, as I intend to call myself from this day forward, and that the same name may fit me, as the said name may fit me better. I mean, when the opportunity offers, to have a very rueful countenance painted on my shield."
There is no occasion, Signor, for wasting time or money on making that countenance, said Sancho, for all that need be done is for your worship to show your own face to face, to those who look at you, and without anything more, either image or shield, they will call you him of the rueful countenance. And believe me, I am telling you the truth, for I assure you, Signor, and in good part be it said, hunger and the loss of your grinders have given you such an ill-favoured face, that, as I say, the rueful picture may be very well spared.
Don Quixote laughed at Sancho's pleasantry. Nevertheless, he resolved to call himself by that name, and have his shield or buckler painted, as he had devised. Don Quixote would have looked to see whether the body in the litter were bones or not, but Sancho would not have it, saying,
Signor, you have ended this perilous adventure more safely for yourself than any of those I have seen. Perhaps these people, though beaten and and routed, may bethink themselves that it is a single man that has beaten them, and feeling sore and ashamed of it, may take heart, and come in search of us and give us trouble enough. The ass is in proper trim. The mountains are near at hand. Hunger presses. We have nothing more to do but make good our retreat, and, as the saying is, the dead to the grave, the living to the loaf.
And, driving his ass before him, he begged his master to follow, who, feeling that Sancho was right, did so without replying, and after proceeding some little distance between two hills, they found themselves in a wide and retired valley, where they alighted, and Sancho unloaded his beast and stretched upon the green grass with hunger for sauce. They breakfasted, dined, lunched, and supped all at once, satisfying their appetites with more than one store of cold meat, which the dead man's clerical gentlemen, who seldom put themselves on short allowance, had brought with them on their sumpter mule. But another piece of ill luck befell them, which Sancho held the worst of all, and that was that they had no wine to drink, nor even water to moisten their lips, and as thirst tormented them, Sancho, observing that the meadow where they were was full of green and tender grass, said what will be told in the following chapter. Alright, I think we need to take a short break. I need to refill my tea rather urgently, if you've heard the rather apparent wheezing that's been going on. So, I'll be back in just a few minutes with a fresh cup of tea, and we'll see if we can get another chapter or two in tonight when we return. Be back in just a bit. Thanks! Alright, we are back, and I've got a fresh cup of tea. We've switched up to peppermint. It seems to do a little bit more on the emergency treatment rate. Alright, let's go ahead and try and get through one more chapter tonight, and I think we will call it after that. I don't think I've got a full 2 hours in me tonight. But this next one is a little on the longer side. We've got about 11 pages in this chapter, so it'll probably still get us pretty close to our quota. So, huzzah, huzzah. Hi, Simba. Alright, so, let's round out the evening with chapter 20 of The Unexampled and Unheard of Adventure which was achieved by the valiant Don Quixote of La Mancha, with less peril than any other achieved by any famous knight in the world. Yeah, I'm at that point in going through my teas when they're all starting to run out about at the same time, and I'm like, oh no, oh no.
It cannot be, senor, but this grass is a proof that there must be hard by some spring or brook to give it moisture, so it would be well to move a little farther on, that we may find some place where we may quench this terrible thirst that plagues us, which, beyond a doubt, is more distressing than hunger.
The advice seemed good to Don Quixote, and he leading Rocinante by the bridle and Sancho the ass by the halter, after he had packed away upon him the remains of the supper, they advanced the meadow, feeling their way. The darkness of the night made it impossible to see anything, but they had not gone 200 paces when a loud noise of water, as if falling from great rocks, struck their ears. The sound cheered them greatly, but halting to make out by listening from what quarter it came, they heard unseasonably another noise, which spoiled the satisfaction the sound of the water gave them, especially for Sancho, who was by nature timid and faint-hearted. They heard, I say, strokes falling with a measured beat, and a certain rattling of iron and chains that, together with the furious din of the water, would have struck terror into any heart but Don Quixote's. The night was, as has been said, dark, and they had happened to reach a spot in among some tall trees, whose leaves, stirred by a gentle breeze, made a low, ominous sound. So that, what with the solitude, the place, the darkness, the noise of the water, and the rustling of the leaves, everything inspired awe and dread, more especially as they perceived that the strokes did not cease, nor the wind lull, nor morning approach, to all which might be added their ignorance as to where they were. But Don Quixote, supported by his intrepid heart, leaped on Rocinante, and, bracing his buckler on his arm, brought his pike to the slope and said,
Friend Sancho, know that I, by heaven's will, have been born into this, our Iron Age, to revive in it the Age of Gold, or the Golden, as it is called. I am he for whom perils, mighty achievements, and valiant deeds are reserved. I am, I say again, he who is to revive the Knights of the Round Table, the 12 of France, and the 9 Worthies.
Okay, yeah, let's not have that. Let's get a quick ban on this guy. Bonk. Was that all the same? Yep, okay, cool. I think we're good. Sorry, somebody... Automod found somebody, and I'm like, I'll just agree with that there. Thank you very much. Where were we?
I am, I say again, he who is to revive the Knights of the Round Table, the 12 of France, and the 9 Worthies, and he who is to consign to oblivion the Platiers, the Tablantes, and the Olivantes, and Tirantes, the Phobuses and the Belianices, and with the whole herd of famous knights errant of days gone by, performing, in these in which I live, such exploits, marvels, and feats of arms as shall obscure their brightest deeds. Thou dost mark well, faithful and trusty squire, the gloom of this night, its strange silence, the dull, confused murmur of those trees, the awful sound of that water, in quest of which we came. That seems as though it were precipitating and dashing itself down from the lofty mountains of the moon, and that incessant hammering that wounds and pains our ears, which things all together, and each of itself, are enough to instill fear, dread, and dismay into the breast of Mars himself, much more into one not used to hazards and adventures of the kind. Well then, all this that I put before thee is but an incentive and stimulant to my spirit, making my heart burst in my bosom and through eagerness to engage in this adventure, arduous as it promises to be. Therefore, tighten Rocinant's girths a little, and God be with thee. Wait for me here 3 days and no more, and if in that time I come not back, thou canst return to our village, and thence, to do me a favour and a service, thou wilt go to El Toboso, where thou shalt say to my incomparable Lady Dulcinea that her captive knight hath died in attempting things that might make him worthy of being called hers.
When Sancho heard his master's words, he began to weep in the most pathetic way, saying,
Signor, I know not why your worship wants to attempt this so dreadful adventure. It is night now. No one sees us here. We can easily turn about and take ourselves out of danger, even if we don't drink for 3 days to come, and as there is no one to see us, all the less will there be anyone to set us down as cowards. Besides, I have many a time heard the curate of our village, whom your worship knows well, preach that he who seeks danger perishes in it. So it is not right to tempt God by trying so tremendous a feat, from which there can be no escape, save by miracle, and heaven has performed enough of them for your worship in delivering you from being blanketed as I was, and bringing you out victorious and safe and sound among all those enemies that were with the dead man. And if all this does not move or soften that hard heart, let this thought and reflection move it, that you will have hardly quitted this spot, when from pure fear I shall yield my soul up to anyone that will take it. I left home and wife and children to come and serve your worship, trusting to do better and not worse. But as covetousness bursts the bag, it has rent my hopes asunder. For just as I had them highest about getting that wretched unlucky island your worship has so often promised me, I see that instead, and in lieu of it, you mean to desert me now in a place so far from human reach. For God's sake, master mine, deal not so unjustly by me, and if your worship will not entirely give up attempting this feat, at least put it off till morning. For by what the law I learned when I was a shepherd tells me, it cannot want 3 hours of dawn now, because the mouth of the horn is overhead, and makes midnight in the line of the left arm.
All right, I am not quite up to the big monologues like that. Calm down, Sancho. How canst thou see, Sancho, said Don Quixote, where it makes that line, or where this mouth or this occiput is what that thou talkest of, when the night is so dark that there is not a star to be seen in the whole heaven?
That's true, said Sancho, but fear has sharp eyes, and seen things underground, much more above in heavens beside. There is good reason to show that it now wants but little of day.
Let it want what it may, replied Don Quixote, it shall not be said of me now, or at any time, that tears or entreaties turned me aside from doing what was in accordance with knightly usage. And so I beg of thee, Sancho, to hold thy peace, for God, who has put it into my heart to undertake now this so unexampled and terrible adventure, will take care to watch over my safety, and console thy sorrow. What thou hast to do is tighten Rocinante's girths well, and wait here, for I shall come back shortly, alive or dead.
Sancho, perceiving it his master's final resolve, and how little his tears, counsels, and entreaties prevailed with him, determined to have recourse to his own ingenuity, and compel him, if he could, to wait till daylight. And so, while tightening the girths of the horse, he quietly, and without being felt, with his ass's halter tied both Rocinante's legs, so that, when Don Quixote strove to go, he was unable, as the horse could only move by jumps. Seeing the success of his trick, Sancho Panza said, "See there, Señor, heaven, moved by my tears and prayers, has so ordered it that Rocinante cannot stir, and if you will be obstinate and spur and strike him, you will only provoke fortune, and kick, as they say, against the pricks." Don Quixote, at this, grew desperate, but the more he drove his heels into the horse, the less he stirred him, and, not having any suspicion of the tying, he was fain to resign himself, and wait till daybreak, or until Rocinante could move. Firmly persuaded that all this came of something other than Sancho's ingenuity. So he said to him,
"As it is so, Sancho, and as Rocinante cannot move, I am content to wait till dawn smiles upon us, even though I weep while it delays its coming."
"There is no need to weep," answered Sancho, "for I will amuse your worship by telling stories from this till daylight, unless, indeed, you like to dismount and lie down to sleep a little on the green grass after the fashion of knights errant, so as to be fresher when day comes and the moment arrives for attempting this extraordinary adventure you are looking forward to."
"What art thou talking about dismounting or sleeping for?" said Don Quixote. "Am I, thinkest thou, one of those knights that take their rest in the presence of danger? Sleep thou, who art born to sleep, or do as thou wilt, for I will act as I think most consistent with my character."
Dropping prings. Hang tight. Alright, I think we're back. Yep, looks good to me. Alright.
"Be not angry, master mine," replied Sancho. "I did not mean to say that."
And coming close to him, he laid one hand on the pommel of the saddle, and the other on the cantle, so that he held his master's left thigh in his embrace, not daring to separate a finger's width from him. So much afraid was he of the strokes which still resounded with a regular beat. Don Quixote bade him tell some story to amuse him, as he had proposed, to which Sancho replied that he would, if his dread of what he heard would let him.
"Still," said he, "I will strive to tell a story which, if I can manage to relate it, and nobody interferes with the telling, is the best of stories. And let your worship give me your attention, for here I begin." "What was, and may the good that is to be for all, and the evil for him who goes to look for it. Your worship must know that the beginning of the old folk used to put their tales was not just as each one pleased. It was a maxim of Cato Zonzorino, the Roman, that says the evil for him that goes to look for it, and it comes as pat to the purpose now as ring to finger. to show that your worship should keep quiet and not go looking for evil in any quarter, and that we should go back by some other road, since nobody forces us to follow this, in which so many terrors affright us."
"Go on with thy story, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "and leave the choice of our road to my care."
"I say then," continued Sancho, "that in a village of Estremadura there was a goat shepherd, that is to say, one who tended goats, which shepherd, or goatherd, as my story goes, was called Lope Ruiz, and this Lope Ruiz was in love with a shepherdess called Torralba, which shepherdess called Torralba was the daughter of a rich grazier, and this rich grazier—"
"If this is the way thou tellest thy tale, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "repeating twice all thou hast to say, thou wilt not have done these 2 days. Go straight on with it, and tell it like a reasonable man, or else say nothing."
"Tales are always told in my country in the very way I am telling this," answered Sancho, "and I cannot tell it in any other, nor is it right of your worship to ask me to make new customs."
"Tell it as thou wilt," replied Don Quixote, "and as fate will have it, that I cannot help listening to thee. Go on."
"And so, lord of my soul," continued Sancho, "as I have said, this shepherd was in love with Torralba the shepherdess, who was a wild, buxom lass with something of the look of a man about her, for she had little moustaches. I fancy I see her now."
"Then you knew her?" said Don Quixote.
"I did not know her," said Sancho, "but he who told me the story said it was so true and certain that when I told it to another, I might safely declare and swear I had seen it all myself."
Hang on. More drop frames, hang on. Alright, just little blips. We're okay. Where were we?
"And so, in the course of time, the devil, who never sleeps and puts everything in confusion, contrived that the love the shepherd bore the shepherdess turned into hatred and ill will, and the reason, according to evil tongues, was some little jealousy she caused him, that crossed the line and trespassed on forbidden ground. And so much did the shepherd hate her from that time forward, that, in order to escape from her, he determined to quit the country, and go where he should never set eyes on her again. Torralba, when she found herself spurned by Lope, was immediately smitten with love for him, though she had never loved him before."
"That is the natural way of women," said Don Quixote, "to scorn the one that loves them, and love the one that hates them. Go on, Sancho."
"It came to pass," said Sancho, "that the shepherd carried out his intention, and driving his goats before him, took his way across the plains of Estremadura to pass over into the kingdom of Portugal. Torralba, who knew of it, went after him, and on foot and barefoot followed him at a distance, with a pilgrim's staff in her hand and a scrip round her neck, in which she carried, it is said, a bit of looking-glass and a piece of comb, and some little pot or other of paint for her face. But let her carry what she did. I am not going to trouble myself to prove it. All I say is, that the shepherd, they say, came with his flock to cross over the river Guadiana, which was at that time swollen, and almost overflowing its banks. And at the time he came there was neither ferry nor boat nor anyone to carry him or his flock to the other side, at which he was much vexed, for he perceived that Torralba was approaching and would give him great annoyance with her tears and entreaties. However, he went looking about so closely that he discovered a fisherman, who had alongside of him a boat so small that he could only hold one person and one goat. But for all that he spoke to him and agreed with him to carry himself and his 300 goats across. The fisherman got into the boat and carried one goat over. He came back and carried another over. He came back again and again brought over another. Let your worship keep count of the goats of the fisherman is taking across, for if one escapes the memory, there will be an end of the story. And it will be impossible to tell another word of it. to proceed, I must tell you the landing place on the other side was miry and slippery, and the fisherman lost a great deal of time in going and coming, till he returned for another goat, and another, and another.
Take it for granted he brought them all across, said Don Quixote, and don't keep going and coming in this way, or else thou wilt not make an end of bringing them over this 12-month.
How many have gone across so far? Asked Sancho.
How the devil do I know?
Replied Don Quixote. There it is, said Sancho. What I told you, that you must keep a good count. Well then, by God, there is an end of the story, for there is no going any farther.
How can that be? Said Don Quixote. Is it so essential to the story to know to a nicety the goats that have crossed over, that if there be a mistake of one in the reckoning, thou canst not go on with it?
No, señor, not a bit, said Sancho. But when I asked your worship to tell me how many goats crossed, and you answered you did not know, at that very instant, all I had to say passed away out of my memory. And, faith, there was much virtue in it, and entertainment.
So then, said Don Quixote, the story has come to an end?
As much as my mother has, said Sancho.
In truth, said Don Quixote, thou hast told one of the rarest stories, tales, or histories that anyone in the world could have imagined, and such a way of telling it and ending it was never seen, nor will be in a lifetime, though I expected nothing else from thy excellent understanding. But I do not wonder, for perhaps those ceaseless strokes may have confused thy wits.
All that may be, replied Sancho, but I know that, as to my story, all that can be said is that it ends there where the mistake in the count of the passage of the goats begins.
Let it end where it will, well and good, said Don Quixote, and let us see if Rocinante can go. And again he spurred him, and again Rocinante made jumps and remained where he was, so well tied was he. Just then, whether it was the cold of the morning that was now approaching, or that he had eaten something laxative at supper, or that it was only natural, as is most likely, Sancho felt a desire to do what no one could do for him. But so great was the fear that had penetrated his heart, he dared not separate himself from his master by as much as the black of his nail. To escape doing what he wanted was, however, also impossible. So, what he did, for peace's sake, was to remove his right hand, which held the back of the saddle, and with it to untie gently and silently the running string which alone held up his breeches, so that on loosening they at once fell down round his feet like fetters. He then raised his shirt as well as he could and bared his hind quarters, no slim ones, but this accomplished, which he fancied was all he had to do to get out of this terrible strait and embarrassment, another, still greater difficulty presented itself, for it seemed to him impossible to relieve himself without making some noise, and he ground his teeth and squeezed his shoulders together, holding his breath as much as he could. But in spite of his precaution, he was unlucky enough, after all, to make a little noise, very different from that which was causing him so much fear. These two, I swear to God. But Don Quixote, hearing it, said, "What noise is that, Sancho?"
"I don't know, señor," said he. "It must be something new, for adventures and misadventures never begin with a trifle."
Once more he tried his luck, and succeeded so well that, without any further noise or disturbance, he found himself relieved of the burden that had given him so much discomfort. But as Don Quixote's sense of smell was as acute as his hearing, and as Sancho was so closely linked with him that the fumes rose almost in a straight line, it could not be but that some should reach his nose. And as soon as they did, he came to its relief by compressing it between his fingers, saying in a rather snuffling tone, "Sancho, it strikes me that thou art in great fear."
"I am," answered Sancho, "but how does your worship perceive it now more than ever?"
"Because just now thou smellest stronger than ever. Not of ambergris,
answered Don Quixote.
Very likely, said Sancho. But that's not my fault, but your worships for leading me about at unseasonable hours and at unwonted paces.
Then go back 3 or 4, my friend,
said Don Quixote, all the time with his fingers to his nose.
and for the future, pay more attention to thy person, and to what thou owest to mine, which is my great familiarity with thee that has bred this contempt.
I'll bet, replied Sancho, that your worship thinks I have done something I ought not to with my person.
It makes it worse to stir it, friend Sancho,
returned Don Quixote. With this, and other talk of the same sort, master and man passed the night, till Sancho, perceiving that daybreak was coming on apace, very cautiously untied Rocinante and tied up his breeches. As soon as Rocinante found himself free, though by nature he was not at all meddlesome, he seemed to feel lively and began pawing. For as to capering, begging his pardon, he knew not what it meant. Don Quixote then, observing that Rocinante could move, took it as a good sign, and a signal that he should attempt the dread adventure. By this time day had fully broken, and everything showed distinctly, and Don Quixote saw that he was among some tall trees, chestnuts which cast a very deep shade. He perceived likewise that the sound of the strokes did not cease, but could not discover what caused it, and so without any further delay he let Rocinante feel the spur, and once more taking leave of Sancho, he told him to wait for him there 3 days at most, as he had said before. And if he should not have returned by that time, he might feel sure it had been God's will that he should end his days in that perilous adventure. He again repeated the message and commission with which he was to go on his behalf to Lady Dulcinea, and said he was not to be uneasy as to the payment of his services, for before leaving home he had made his will, in which he would find himself fully recompensed in the matter of wages in due proportion to the time he had served. But if God delivered him safe, sound, and unhurt out of that danger, he might look upon the promised island as much more than certain. Sancho began to weep afresh on again hearing the affecting words of his good master, and resolved to stay with him until the final issue and end of the business. From these tears, and this honorable resolve of Sancho Panza's, the author of this history infers that he must have been of good birth, and at least an old Christian, and the feeling he displayed touched his, but not so much as to make him show any weakness. On the contrary, hiding what he felt as well as he could, he began to move towards that quarter whence the sound of the water and the strokes seemed to come. Sancho followed him on foot, leading by the halter, as his custom was, his ass, his constant comrade in prosperity or adversity. And advancing some distance through the shady chestnut trees, they came upon a little meadow at the foot of some high rocks, down which a mighty rush of water flung itself. At the foot of the rocks were some rudely constructed houses, looking more like ruins than houses, from among which came, they perceived, the din and clatter of blows, which still continued without intermission. Rocinante took fright at the noise of the water and of the blows, but quieting him, Don Quixote advanced, step by step, toward the houses, commending himself with all his heart to his lady, imploring her support in that dread pass and enterprise, and on the way, commending himself to God, too, not to forget him. Sancho, who never quitted his side, stretched his neck as far as he could, and peered between the legs of Rocinante to see if he could now discover what it was that caused him such fear and apprehension. They went, it might be 100 paces farther, when on turning a corner, the true cause, beyond the possibility of any mistake, of that dread sounding and to them awe-inspiring noise, that had kept them all the night in such fear and perplexity appeared plain and obvious. And it was, if reader thou art not disgusted and disappointed, 6 fulling hammers, by which their alternate strokes made all the din. When Don Quixote perceived what it was, he was struck dumb and rigid from head to foot. Sancho glanced at him and saw him with his head bent down upon his breast in manifest mortification. And Don Quixote glanced at Sancho and saw him with his cheeks puffed out and with his mouth full of laughter, and evidently ready to explode with it, and in spite of his vexation he could not help laughing at the sight of him. And when Sancho saw his master begin to get so heartily that he had to hold his sides with both hands to keep himself from bursting with laughter, 4 times he stopped, and as many times did his laughter break out afresh with the same violence as at first, whereat Don Quixote grew furious, above all, when he heard him say mockingly, "Thou must know, friend Sancho, that of heaven's will I was born in this our iron age to revive in it the golden age of, the golden age, or golden, or age of gold. I am he, for whom are reserved perils, mighty achievements, valiant deeds." And here he went on repeating the words that Don Quixote uttered the first time they heard the awful strokes. Don Quixote, then seeing that Sancho was turning him into ridicule, was so mortified and vexed that he lifted up his pike and smote him 2 such blows that if, instead of catching them on his shoulders, he caught them on his head, there would have been no wages to pay, unless indeed to his heirs. Sancho, seeing that he was getting an awkward return in earnest for his jest, and fearing his master might carry it still further, said to him very humbly,
"Calm yourself, sir. But by God, I am only joking."
"Well, then, if you are joking, I am not," replied Don Quixote. "Look here, my lively gentleman. If these, instead of being fulling hammers, had been some perilous adventure, have I not, I think you, shown the courage required for the attempt and achievement? Am I, perchance, being as I am a gentleman, bound to know and distinguish sounds, and tell whether they come from fulling mills or not? And that, when, perhaps, as is the case, I have never in my life seen any, as you have, low bore as you are, that have been born and bred among them? But turn me these 6 hammers into 6 giants, and bring them to beard me, one by one or all together, and if I do not knock them head over heels, then make what mockery you like of me."
"No more of that, senor," returned Sancho. "I own I went a little too far with the joke. But tell me, your worship, now that peace is made between us, and may God bring you out of all the adventures that may befall you as safe and sound as he has brought you out of this one, was it not a thing to laugh at? And is it not a good story, the great fear we were in? At least, that I was in, for as your worship I see now that you neither know nor understand what either fear or dismay is."
"I do not deny," said Don Quixote, "that what happened to us may be worth laughing at, but it is not worth making a story about. There is not everyone that is shrewd enough to hit the right point of a thing."
"At any rate," said Sancho, "your worship knew how to hit the right point with your pike, aiming at my head and hitting me on the shoulders, thanks be to God and my own smartness in dodging it. But let that pass. All will come out in the scourings. For I have heard say, he loves thee well that makes thee weep. And moreover, that it is the way with great lords after any hard words that they give a servant to give him a pair of breeches, though I do not know what they give after blows, unless it be that knights errant after blows give islands, or kingdoms on the mainland."
"It may be on the dice," said Don Quixote, "that all thou sayest will come true. Overlook the past, for thou art shrewd enough to know that our first movements are not in our own control. And one thing for the future bear in mind, that thou curb and restrain thy loquacity in my company. For in all the books of chivalry that I have read, and they are innumerable, I never met with a squire who talked so much to his lord as thou dost to thine. And in fact, I feel it to be a great fault of thine and mine, of thine, that thou hast so little respect for me, of mine, that I do not make myself more respected. There was Gandalin, the squire of Amadis of Gaul, that was count of the Insula Firme, and we read of him that he always addressed his lord with his cap in his hand, his head bowed down, his body bent double, more turquesco. And then, what shall we say of Gasabal, the squire of Galleo, who was so silent that in order to indicate to us the greatness of his marvelous taciturnity, his name is only once mentioned in the whole of that history, as long as it is truthful. From all I have said, thou wilt gather, Sancho, that there must be a difference between master and man, between lord and lackey, between knight and squire, so that from this day forward in our intercourse we must observe more respect, and take less liberties. For in whatever way I may be provoked with you, it will be bad for the picture. The favours and benefits that I have promised you will come in due time, and if they do not, your wages at least will not be lost, as I have already told you.
All your worship says is very well, said Sancho, but I should like to know, in case the time of favours should not come, and it might be necessary to fall back upon wages. How much did the squire of a knight-errant get in those days? And did they agree by the month or by the day like bricklayers?
I do not believe, replied Don Quixote, that such squires were ever on wages, but were dependent on favour, and if I have now mentioned thine in the sealed will I have left at home, it was with a view to what may happen. For as yet I know not how chivalry will turn out in these wretched times of ours. I do not wish my soul to suffer for trifles in the other world. For I would have thee know, Sancho, that in this there is no condition more hazardous than that of adventurers.
That is true, said Sancho, since the mere noise of the hammers and of a filling mill can disturb and disquiet the heart of such a valiant errant adventurer as your worship. But you may be sure I will not open my lips henceforward to make light of anything of your worships, but only to honour you as my master and natural lord.
By doing so, replied Don Quixote, shalt thou live long on the face of the earth, for next to parents, masters are to be respected as though they were parents.
All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 20, and actually, we're not too far, so yeah, that gets us to about 18%. We're a little under quota, but as we had mentioned, I'm also rather under the weather today, if you can't hear it already. So let's go ahead and set a bookmark here. And we can reflect a little bit. The developing relationship between Don Quixote and Sancho is actually something special. They've got a bit of camaraderie going on, but also, like, bad things consistently happen to both of them, but seemingly more to Sancho. And through it all, he doesn't really get angry about it all, even when it's very blatantly apparent that Don Quixote is not really going to be coming out and coming up to bat for him. So it is an interesting dynamic they have going on. And this was kind of a turning point here, where through the full of the night, Sancho has just had enough, and he bursts out laughing at him. And Don Quixote was not terribly happy about that. So we'll have to see how this relationship continues to develop, whether Sancho tries to be meek, or whether he shows a little bit more that he's his own person and is only going to put up with so much of Don Quixote's shit. Either way could go pretty well. Yeah. Alright, let's see if we're going to be able to raid tonight, because we got it to work last time. Let's see if someone is actually reading this time instead of somebody doing reaction content. This lady's reading The Giver. That could be fun. Let's see if she'll let us come along. Alright, let's see. Nope, did not like it. Like, with only 4 of us here, it may not let us, but we'll try again. Yeah, that can be a little special sometimes. Let's see, who else we got? Oh! This guy is reading the end of Maltese Falcon. Oh, I would have liked to go to that one. Damn it. Alright, we'll try one more, but I'm thinking it may just not like it when we've got less than 5. Nope. All right. I'm gonna say that's enough for tonight for that. For the the attempt to raid. So we should be back on our regular schedule on Tuesday. I'm going to sleep probably until then. I've already called off work tomorrow. So with that, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for putting up with my nonsense. And until next time. Yeah, we did what we could. All right. Have a great night, guys. Thanks again for joining us. And until next time, good night.